If you are new to our channel, please like, subscribe, hit that little bell notification. It really does help us out. 1942 to 1952. In UFO terms, probably one of the biggest decades in our history. I mean, some of the nuclear weapons are tested for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
We then see a lot of UFO activity in the New Mexico area where these weapons are tested. Obviously, then in 47, Roswell happened in roughly the same area.
Yep.
But this all sort of like climaxed, and they call it the, like say, the UFO flap or the invasion of Washington in 1952.
Yeah.
Right? So you got July, the 19th and the 20th of July was the first
weekend
when it first happened. Yeah, the first weekend. Edward Nugent is a big character in this first weekend. And the debunkers have actually sort of go nuts to this guy and just say, well, he was just an idiot and he caused panic. But he was an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, which is now Reagan National. He saw 7 objects on radar. The senior air traffic controller witnessed these, Harry Barnes, and confirmed it. Right?
Yep.
So that's objects on radar. But we've still got radar really quickly because you do get lots of false positives on radar.
Yes. You can.
Yeah. Clouds obviously appear on radar, but even hot air can appear on radar, and these things
have been misidentified before as an intercontinental ballistic missile strike by Russia, and we're almost ready to fire back. So
it turned out to be a flock of birds. Yeah, but I would say by 52 they'd been using this technology for over 10 years. They understood these things. It was before digital filters came in a few years later, and they said apparently we get a lot less UFO sightings on radar now because we have these digital filters. The cynic in me says, was that a digital filter to filter out the alien UFOs, or is it just a digital filter to actually filter out the false positives sort of thing?
Yeah, good question.
You could hardwire the radar to ignore what you don't want them to look at. Maybe. You know?
Maybe.
But these things weren't just seen on radar. Then Coughlin and Zacco saw these objects, and they described it as moving at an incredible speeds over at the airport. So they confirmed what was seen on radar. Over Washington, over White House, and then over the Capitol building. And there were some images caught. Andrews Air Force Base were then asked, what is over Washington? And they said, we've got nothing on radar initially. Airman William Brady was then at the tower, and he was looking out the window, and he saw what he described as an orange ball of fire. And he says, as soon as he saw it, it shot off and disappeared. Which again, you can talk about maybe a meteor or like something like that, but he says it was still and then it moved, which doesn't seem like a natural phenomenon. Then so again we move on. SC Pearman was a Washington National waiter on DC-4. He says he then saw a meteor. He's described it as a meteor. So he's on an aircraft. Air traffic control radio radioed the objects were approaching the DC-4. They then saw 6 or 7 objects, and he described them as white tailless objects. Andrews Air Force Base then saw orange and red lights hovering and moving around the Air Force Base several times during the evening. 3 a.m., 3 radar stations were tracking objects, and they vanished as 2 F-94 Starfire jets entered the airspace. So they sent jets to see what these objects were. As soon as the jets entered the airspace, they gone.
Almost like they can pop in and out of our reality, of the dimensions with which we perceive the world within which we exist.
Well, as soon as the aircraft ran low on fuel and had to go back, guess what happened?
They reappeared.
They came back. Harry Barnes was convinced the objects were monitoring them. So he says it seemed intelligent.
Yeah. And that's such a scary comment from somebody that's been observing them.
Yeah, exactly.
Sense.
So this then obviously went crazy the next day. It was in all the newspapers, was everywhere. And everything, people would remember the Battle of LA at this point as well. I forget, it's only a few years after.
Yeah.
Well, 10 years after. But Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, though, is an interesting character because at the time he was the supervisor of Project Bluebook.
Yes.
Which we all know is the Air Force's monitoring of UFOs and to try to find out whether they were a problem or not.
Yeah, it was their front, wasn't it? Probably of what they were telling the public that they were researching into and finding.
A lot of it was showing they were prioritizing explaining why it wasn't a UFO rather than
explaining away all UFO sightings. Yeah. Which you can, to be fair to them, you can explain away 95% of them. But like Nick Pope, the MOD in the UK says, after 25 years of investigating them, there is a 5%, that small 5%, that are real metallic objects tracked on radar, doing incredible speeds that just
that we can't explain.
Yeah.
So he was actually in Washington at the time, this Edward J. Ruppelt. He investigated this immediately, though, obviously, the next morning. He then spoke to a Captain J. James, who said it was weather conditions causing the radar signals. So they tried to blame it away immediately as these pockets of warm air that were detected by the radar and that they were just misidentified. These pockets of warm air, though, seem to have ignited and were glowing because loads of people saw them, which you don't normally see pockets of warm air with your actual own eyes.
No. Unfortunately, that's an excuse rather than a scientific explanation, in my opinion.
Yeah, most definitely. So, the next weekend comes. Nothing much happens. The next weekend comes, July 26th.
Yep.
Kicked off at 8:15 in the evening. A stewardess and the pilot saw lights above their plane as they were flying into the national airport.
We're back.
They're back. Objects were tracked at Andrew and Washington National, Andrew Air Force Base and Washington National. Master Sergeant Charles E. Cummings, no joke, described them. He said, "They're not shooting stars. There were no trails. Travelled faster than any shooting star I've ever seen." So again, he saw it. Again, we're going to talk about these corroborating witnesses. We're on about our fifth or sixth one already.
Yes.
Albert M. Chop was a Blue Book spokesman. Reporters are obviously interested in this because obviously the weekend before it happened. So as soon as there was sightings again, they all shot to Andrew Air Force Base.
Yeah, of course. It makes sense, yeah.
Albert M. Chop, Blue Book spokesman, refused to let them see the radar screens. And it was his decision. He told them to get out, basically, and no one was allowed to take photos of what they were seeing.
Right.
11:30, objects tracked to the National Radar Center estimate objects were moving at 7,000 miles an hour. Now, you were talking about your point about warm air pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Weather doesn't travel at 7,000 miles an hour.
No. If it did, you'd be dragged into the air by the wind and be dead probably long ago.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Even like the really high speed winds that are, the high up ones that they travel a few hundred miles an hour.
Yeah.
Hurricanes, a few hundred miles an hour.
And
nothing travels at 7,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, a couple hundred miles an hour is sucking you up into the air. So yeah, we don't have weather traveling at several thousand miles an hour.
Yeah. Well, 7,000 miles an hour is like Mach 10. We don't have anything that goes even remotely like that now. You have to go ballistic to get anything that travels anything like that sort of speed.
I think NASA have got a scramjet, and that
can't they do about Mach 6, Mach 7?
7, I think, with the scramjet, but that can only be launched from another vehicle that's already broken the sound barrier. I think the vehicle that launches scramjet is already doing Mach 1.
Scramjets need to be moving pretty fast to work in the first place, don't they? They have to be already traveling. If we go back to the timeline just quickly, so 11:30 p.m. Objects were tracked at the National Radar Center. They were traveling 7,000 miles an hour. They scrambled 2 Starfire jets. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. The object is traveling at 7,000 miles an hour. Let's try and find our jet to go off it that can barely do Mach 1 and see if we can catch it. It didn't really work.
Do 500 miles an hour.
Yeah. So Captain John McHugo saw nothing, but his wingman, William Patterson, saw 4 glowing lights. Ground control asked if he saw anything. He answered, "They're all around me. What do I do?" And he got no answer. So he was up in the air. These objects appeared. Lights were everywhere. He asked the ground, "What do I do?" And they didn't know.
Yes.
But then again, this is... Yeah. So go on.
It just shows how little anyone knows about what these objects are and understands about them. And then that does give credence to your comment about Eisenhower and Churchill having that conversation about keeping things hush.
Yeah, don't talk about it.
They just don't know. They can't tell us anything, and rather admit failure to defend your airspace, defend your borders. They'd rather try and just sweep it under the carpet and look at the bright light.
Yeah. Well, they tried to explain this at the time by again saying the weather. So the Washington Weather Center reported slight temperature inversions, which again is not what we're talking about here over Washington. So there were slight weather inversions. Lieutenant John Holcomb, though, reported there was nothing like strong enough to explain what they were seeing, and they were seeing good, solid returns on radar. So again, that tends to suggest they knew what they were looking at, and it wasn't weather inversions. President Truman was really concerned. He had reported back to him that it was temperature inversions. That's what they told the president, obviously. Edward Taus of the CIA reported that the incident was easily explained by weather, but they were basically asked to monitor continuously. And this is also then when Churchill wrote the letter saying, "What's going on in America? Is it something we should be worried about?" And the British government said, "No, we don't have to worry about that."